In this part, we're going to extend the forest. We're going to create a very large landscape in the background, which will, of course, serve as a filler for the horizon. So that will give the idea that the forest is extremely large. I'm going to go outside of these 3 cameras, and I'm just going to rotate and zoom out. So this is our hero patch. So within this area, we'll be taking our digital photos. But outside of this area, we also need some forest just to fill the distance. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a plane like we did before. And if you recall, our original plane was 100 by 100 meters. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make it 10 times bigger. So it's 1 kilometer in each direction. I'm going to set the segments to 80 by 80. And I'll make this editable. Now if you go to the top view and go into polygon mode and just zoom out a little bit like that, we can easily select the polygons inside of our original forest and just delete those. And what we're left with now, if I go back to my 3D view, is just a cutout of the original forest. If I lift it up here, there you go. And yeah, everything else will be the simplified version of the forest to fill the background. So let's go ahead and sculpt this plane like we did before. And as you can see, it's very deep, so we shouldn't have any issues filling the horizon this way. In order to make the viewport a bit more responsive, I'm going to disable a few cloners. So this way, without those smaller details, the viewport becomes very responsive again. And I'm going to go into my sculpting tools. Now, before I showed you how to do that using the sculpting layout, if you want to do some quick sculpting, you can also use these sculpting tools over here. Now, what we want to do is we want to avoid a effect where we break the connection between the 2 planes. So if I use a pool brush and I do this, we get a gap here. And that's obviously not what we want, because that's going to show up as a gap inside the forest. So that's not what we want to do. So let's create a mask to avoid that effect. So I'm going to go to the sculpt, and I have to subdivide this at least once to add a sculpting tag that will allow me to use the mask brush we have over here. And I'll just decrease the size. I'll just paint this area directly around our original forest as a mask. So that's going to prevent this area from being affected by the sculpting. So let's go to Sculpt Brushes, Pool, and let's have a look here. Now if I do the same thing again, you'll see that the area is unaffected. So that's what we want. All right, now let's create some hills in the background. So I'm going to create hills in each direction, but probably one direction will be fine as well for the final renders. But just to be safe, I'm going to create it in multiple directions. And especially the hill in the background, I'm going to make it very big, so we have something nice to fill the horizon. And again, this is a relatively flat forest. You could make the hills much more extreme. And let's maybe decrease the size to create some smaller variations. So just enough variation in your brush and your pressure will allow this to look very organic. Okay, so let's just go down here to see what it looks like. All right. And I'm just going to create some a few more extreme hills, just so we get a nice depth effect. All right, so we get those layers in the background. That's going to look very nice with the atmosphere effect, right? So let's leave it at that for now. Now what we have to do is we have to create some trees for that background and a texture. The texture is very easy. We can just copy these textures we have over here. And we're not going to bother with the ambient occlusion method that generates those areas around the trees, because that's not going to be visible anyway in that distance. So I'm just going to copy these three materials and copy them to the plane. There we go. And now for the trees, I'm going to copy one of the trees to a new file and just delete that ambient occlusion mask we have there, and set the editor mode to render geometry so we can see what's happening. Okay. Now at the moment, if you hit Ctrl I, you'll see that this has 62,000 polygons, and that's a lot for a tree that's very far in the distance. And it's also very detailed, so we can get very close and it still looks good. So let's lower the level of detail. First of all, we can go to the Details tab here and lower the amount of branches. So we don't really need any branches, but let's maybe keep the main branch here. The second layer is already not really visible from far distance. And if we hit Ctrl I, we'll see that this already saves a lot of polygons. Now we also have the leaf amount, and this reduces the amount of leaves and also increases the size of the remaining leaves. So if I set this to 20%, it will have increased the size of the leaves to compensate for the loss of leaves. So if I go to the leaf density here, I can lower this as well. And I can find something that looks from a distance like the tree that we have in our detailed scene. So it's just a matter of playing around with this, and let's have a look. Ctrl I. So now we only have 2,000 polygons. If I maybe increase the branches, we get already 4,800. So let's not do that. So this is a very easy way to create super low detailed trees for the distance. So at this distance it looks ridiculous, but from afar, this is approximately the distance we're going to view it. It looks fine. So we can always come back and change those values a little bit if we need more detail. But for now, let's go with a maximum branch depth of 1, 20% leaves, and 4% density. So let's just close this and go to our main scene. So what I'll do is I'll copy this cloner. So I'll just copy it over here. I'll remove the sphere from the trees, and I'll select the trees and set the leaf density to 4, leaf amount to 20, and the branch depth to 1, and do the same thing for this one. And we'll also copy the large tree. We can just use the same cloner. So let's copy it there as well and repeat the same steps. There we go. And now let's go into the cloner and drag the new plane in there. There we go. So that's our basic distribution. And now we, of course, have to match the distribution to our original batch. So instead of 150, let's try 10 times as many. And let's try 8,000. And that seems to come pretty close, I guess. Okay. So now let's pick a perspective that's nice above our original trees. Like that. and I'm going to enable those detailed cloners again for the water side here. And let's have a look at the render, and especially the render time, of course. So we now have 8,000 new trees, but they are pretty low polygons, so this shouldn't affect the render times too much. So before we had a preparation time of approximately 20 seconds with all those details around the water. And let's see where we end up now. So it's increased by about 7 seconds. So that's still okay, I guess. And we can now see a very far view in the distance with all those additional trees. So that looks great. And let's maybe try to give them a few more leaves and increase the density a little bit. So let's just go to the cloner and set the count to 12,000, for example. And go into our plants, and let's just increase the leaf density to 6% maybe. So you can also do that by just selecting all of them at the same time. And let's render this. So now we increase the amount of trees and we increase the amount of leaves on them. So this should affect the render times in a negative way. So it took about 30 seconds, so that's still it's a few seconds extra, but still manageable for the high quality render with all the details. And if we just wait a little bit to get a few more or a bit less noise. So just to compare it with the previous version, the amount of trees really makes a difference. Before we saw too much of the ground surface, and now we sort of get the feeling that it's more of a filled forest. And also the leaf density shows a little bit more full trees like we have in our hero patch. So yeah, this looks pretty good. Let's have a look from another angle as well. So let's try to rotate the camera. And look at it from above. So here you can see that this is our patch that's detailed, and the rest of the forest is a lot less detailed. Let's have a look. And there we go. So this is just one big massive forest that seems completely connected, and we could just fly over here and fly towards the water and have a very detailed shot of the water. So we have both the very extreme long distance perspective and the very close-up perspectives covered with this setup without it taking too long. I mean, we already have a pretty nice render here without too much noise after 2 minutes. So that's pretty okay for such a heavy scene, right? So that takes care of the environment in the distance, and now it's time to do some fine-tuning.